Some number one picks changed the NBA forever. Others, not so much. But these 10, they weren't just great. They defined entire eras of basketball. One of them dominated so much, they had to change the rules. Another was doubted from day one, but became an all-time great. And the first spot? Let's just say basketball was never the same again. But before we get to that, let's start with a big man who put an entire franchise on his back. The New York Knicks were desperate for a superstar, and in 1985, they got exactly what they needed. Patrick Ewing entered the NBA as one of the most hyped prospects ever. A dominant force at Georgetown, he was expected to instantly turn the Knicks into title contenders. Standing 7 feet tall with elite shot blocking, rebounding, and scoring, Ewing became the face of the franchise and led New York to some of their best years since the 1970s. Ewing made 11 All-Star teams, averaged 21 points, 10 rebounds, and 2.4 blocks per game, and turned Madison Square Garden into one of the most electric arenas in basketball. His defensive presence made him a nightmare for opposing big men, and offensively, his signature mid-range jumper and post moves made him nearly unguardable. Despite his greatness, Ewing could never bring a championship to New York. He came closest in 1994, leading the Knicks to the NBA Finals against Hakeem Olajuwon and the Houston Rockets, but fell just short in a grueling 7-game series. Then in 1999, an aging Ewing made the finals again, this time against the Spurs. But injuries prevented him from playing in the series, and the Knicks lost. Even though he never won a title, Ewing is still considered one of the greatest centers of all time. He brought the Knicks back to relevance, and his impact on the franchise is undeniable. Without him, there's no 90s Knicks identity, no hard-nosed defense, no gritty battles with Michael Jordan and Reggie Miller. But if Ewing was one of the best big men of his time, the next guy, he was a 7-foot warrior who dominated both ends of the floor before handing the torch to one of the greatest dynasties ever. Imagine being so dominant that your team goes from worst to first as soon as you step on the court. That's exactly what happened when David Robinson arrived in San Antonio. David Robinson was unlike any other number one pick. After being selected first overall in 1987, he deferred his NBA debut for 2 years to fulfill his service commitment to the U.S. Navy. When he finally joined the Spurs in 1989, the impact was immediate and historic. San Antonio improved from 21 wins to 56 wins, marking one of the biggest single-season turnarounds in NBA history. In 1995, he won the league MVP, solidifying himself as one of the most dominant big men of his era. Despite his dominance, Robinson struggled to win a championship in the early 90s. But in 1997, everything changed. The Spurs drafted Tim Duncan, and together, they became a legendary front-court duo. In 1999, Robinson finally won his first NBA championship, and in 2003, he retired on top, securing his second title alongside Duncan in his final NBA game. The next guy on this list, he didn't have size, he didn't have strength, but what he did have was one of the deadliest crossovers of all time, and a mentality that struck fear into even the best defenders. At just 6 feet tall and 165 pounds, Iverson was the smallest player ever drafted first overall. But don't let his size fool you. He was one of the most electrifying players to ever touch a basketball. Explosive speed, ankle-breaking handles, and a fearless scoring mentality made him a star from day one. In his rookie season, 1996-97, he averaged 23.5 points per game and won Rookie of the Year, proving that size meant nothing when you had heart and skill. AI was built for highlights, but his game wasn't just flashy, it was unstoppable. He won 4 scoring titles, was a 3-time steals leader. In 2001, he won MVP and carried the 76ers to the NBA Finals. In Game 1, he torched the Lakers for 48 points, including his iconic crossover on Tyronn Lue before stepping over him. Iverson's influence extended far beyond the court. He changed the NBA's fashion, attitude, and style, introducing braids, tattoos, hip-hop culture, and baggy clothes to the league. The NBA literally changed its dress code because of him. His fearless, rebellious attitude made him a cultural icon and one of the most beloved underdogs in sports history. Iverson never won a ring, but that never mattered to his fans. He finished his career as an 11-time All-Star, 4-time scoring champion, 7-time All-NBA selection, and Hall of Famer. His impact went far beyond championships. He inspired an entire generation of smaller players to believe they could dominate no matter their size. Without AI, there is no Steph Curry, no Kyrie Irving, no Ja Morant. Iverson had the handles, the swagger, and the speed. But the next guy, he had the footwork of a guard, the defense of a monster, and 2 rings to prove he was one of the greatest big men ever. Hakeem Olajuwon's path to basketball greatness was unconventional. Born in Nigeria, he grew up playing soccer, which gave him elite footwork that later became his biggest advantage on the basketball court. When he switched to basketball at 17 years old, his raw talent was undeniable. After dominating at the University of Houston, he was drafted first overall in 1984.
The Houston Rockets, who are represented here by owner Charlie Thomas and his daughter Tracy, select Hakeem Olajuwon of the University of Houston.
Ahead of Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, and John Stockton. Olajuwon wasn't just a typical center. His legendary dream shake footwork made defenders look ridiculous, allowing him to score with ease in the post. He combined elite shot blocking, rebounding, and agility to become one of the most unstoppable two-way players ever. For years, Olajuwon dominated, but the Rockets couldn't break through the Western Conference. That changed in 1994 when he led Houston to its first NBA championship, winning Finals MVP and the regular season MVP. He became the only player in history to win MVP, Finals MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, and the championship in the same season. Then, in 1995, with Michael Jordan temporarily retired, Hakeem and the Rockets swept the Orlando Magic in the finals, dominating a young Shaquille O'Neal in one of the most lopsided superstar matchups ever. He embarrassed a young Shaq in the finals. But what happened when Shaq reached his prime? Let's just say no one could stop him. But I'll get back to that in a moment. Now I want to talk about the players that didn't make the list, but came very, very close. Starting with Kyrie Irving, who's often compared to Allen Iverson, and it's easy to see why. Like Iverson, Kyrie is an undersized guard who can score at will, break ankles, and finish at the rim like a magician. Some even argue Kyrie is a more skilled player than AI, with ambidextrous finishing, a deeper shooting range, and an even tighter handle. But what truly separates Kyrie from most elite guards is his clutch gene. No moment was bigger than Game 7 of the 2016 NBA Finals when he hit the championship-winning shot over Steph Curry to give Cleveland its first-ever title.
Irving and Curry, one-on-one. Irving puts it up. It's good! Kyrie Irving from downtown! Cleveland, these fans realize they're 10.6 seconds away now from a championship.
AI never had that moment, and that's why the debate between these two legends continues. Other players that deserve mention include Anthony Davis, Elgin Baylor, and Elvin Hayes, but none of them were quite like the 6th player on this list, the most physically dominant force basketball has ever seen. I told you earlier about Shaq as a young player. Now let's talk about Shaq at his peak. When Shaq reached his prime, there was only one strategy left. Pray he missed his free throws.
Love fest that has broken out here at Staples. Oh, playing. You could hear that. You could hear that.
He entered the NBA as the first pick in 1992, drafted by the Orlando Magic. Instantly, he became a force like no one had ever seen. A 7 feet 1 inch, 325-pound center with the speed of a guard and the strength of a bulldozer, he dominated from day one, winning Rookie of the Year and becoming the youngest player ever to lead the league in field goal percentage. After reaching the NBA Finals with Orlando in 1995, Shaq joined the Los Angeles Lakers in 1996, and that's when he became truly unstoppable. From 2000 to 2002, he led the Lakers to a historic three-peat, winning 3 straight NBA Finals MVPs. In 2000, he averaged a ridiculous 38 points per game, 16.7 rebounds per game, and 2.7 blocks per game in the finals, making it one of the most dominant finals performances ever. His combination of size, footwork, and brute force made him the most physically dominant player in NBA history. But Shaq's dominance was so overwhelming that the NBA had to change its rules. Defenders were allowed to use zone defenses again, just so teams could double and triple team him. The hack-a-Shaq strategy became a common tactic because fouling him was the only way to slow him down. Shaq finished his career as a 4-time NBA champion, 3-time Finals MVP, and 15-time All-Star. He ranks in the top 10 all-time in points scored and is regarded as the most dominant force to ever play in the NBA. At number 5 is the man that was the most boringly dominant player in NBA history, and that's exactly what made him unstoppable. Tim Duncan's path to basketball stardom was far from typical. Growing up in the U.S. Virgin Islands, his first passion was competitive swimming. He had Olympic dreams, until a hurricane destroyed the only Olympic-sized pool on the island. That moment changed everything. Duncan switched to basketball at 14, and just 7 years later, he became the first pick in the 1997 NBA draft. Duncan wasn't flashy. No highlight reel dunks, no trash talk, talk, no controversy, just pure skill, footwork, and a basketball IQ that made him one of the most complete players ever. Nicknamed the Big Fundamental, he dominated the game with perfect post moves, elite defense, and an unshakable calmness under pressure. He never looked excited, but that's because he never needed emotion to dominate. Unlike most first picks, Duncan immediately changed a franchise. In just his second season, 1999, he led the Spurs to their first ever NBA championship and won Finals MVP.
The San Antonio Spurs have won their first NBA championship.
That was only the beginning. He became 5-time NBA champion, 3-time Finals MVP, 2-time NBA MVP, and more. While other superstars chased fame, Duncan stayed loyal to San Antonio for 19 seasons. He wasn't about drama, contract disputes, or media attention. He just wanted to win. Duncan did everything by the book, but the next guy, he broke all the rules and still became a legend. Let's talk about the original triple-double king. Before LeBron James, before Russell Westbrook, there was Oscar Robertson. Drafted in 1960 by the Cincinnati Royals, Robertson was a 6-foot 5-point guard with the strength of a forward, the vision of a playmaker, and the scoring ability of an elite shooter. In an era where most guards were small, pass-first players, Robertson rewrote the blueprint. Before analytics and stat-padding debates, Oscar Robertson was putting up numbers that didn't even seem possible. In the 1961-62 season, he averaged a triple-double for the entire season, 30.8 points per game, 12.5 rebounds per game, 11.4 assists per game. That record stood for 55 years until Russell Westbrook broke it in 2017, but Robertson did it in an era with no three-point line, fewer possessions per game, and a slower pace of play. For most of his career, Robertson put up ridiculous stats but struggled with team success in Cincinnati. That changed in 1970 when he was traded to the Milwaukee Bucks to team up with a young Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. The result? An NBA championship in 1971 with Robertson as the veteran leader and floor general. Robertson wasn't just a basketball icon, he changed the NBA off the court as well. He played a critical role in the lawsuit that led to modern free agency, giving future players the right to negotiate contracts and switch teams more freely. Robertson dominated with stats, but the next guy, he dominated the league for 2 decades, breaking records that stood for nearly 40 years. LeBron James wasn't just a highly rated prospect, he was a once-in-a-lifetime phenomenon. Coming out of high school in Akron, Ohio, he was labeled the chosen one before ever playing an NBA game. With expectations sky high, the Cleveland Cavaliers selected him first overall in the 2003 NBA draft. From day one, LeBron proved he was different. He won Rookie of the Year, averaging 20.9 points, 5.5 rebounds, and 5.9 assists per game as a teenager. By his 4th season, he had carried Cleveland to the NBA Finals, something no one thought possible with the roster he had. He dominated the NBA for 2 decades, breaking records along the way. He won 2 MVPs with the Cavaliers before making the controversial decision to join the Miami Heat in 2010. That move changed everything. In Miami, LeBron fully stepped into his prime, winning back-to-back NBA championships in 2012 and 2013 while earning 4 league MVPs along the way. He returned to Cleveland in 2014 and delivered on his promise, leading the Cavaliers to their first ever NBA title in 2016, overcoming a 3-1 deficit against a 73-win Golden State Warriors team. In 2023, he became the NBA's all-time leading scorer, surpassing Kareem's record that had stood for 39 years. And speaking of Kareem, he is number 2 player on this list. In 1969, the Milwaukee Bucks selected him with the first overall pick, and he wasted no time proving why he was special. By his 2nd season, Kareem had already won his first NBA MVP award and led the Bucks to their first ever championship in 1971. That same year, he converted to Islam and changed his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Kareem wasn't just dominant, he was unstoppable. His signature skyhook was the single most effective scoring move in basketball history. The shot was nearly impossible to block, allowing him to score at will over defenders for 2 decades. With the skyhook as his weapon of choice, he became the league's all-time leading scorer in 1984, a record that stood for 39 years. After winning 1 championship with the Bucks, Kareem was traded to the Los Angeles Lakers in 1975. While he continued to dominate individually, it wasn't until the arrival of Magic Johnson in 1979 that the Lakers became a true dynasty. With Kareem anchoring the team and Magic running the fast break, the Showtime Lakers won 5 championships in the 1980s. And that's why Magic Johnson is the number 1 player on this list. Most rookies take time to adjust to the the NBA. Magic Johnson won a championship in his first season. Drafted first overall in 1979 by the Los Angeles Lakers, Magic was unlike anything the league had ever seen. A 6' 9" point guard with the vision of a true playmaker and the versatility to play all 5 positions, he proved his greatness immediately. In the 1980 NBA Finals, with Kareem injured, Magic stepped in as a rookie, played center in Game 6, and dropped 42 points, 15 rebounds, and 7 assists, leading the Lakers to the championship and winning Finals MVP at just 20 years old. With Kareem as his running mate, Magic led the Lakers to 5 NBA championships in a decade, facing off in legendary battles against Larry Bird and the Boston Celtics. His ability to control the game with his passing, leadership, and clutch performances made him the ultimate winner. Magic's rivalry with Larry Bird started in college when they faced off in the 1979 NCAA championship, and it carried over into the NBA. Their battles, 3 finals matchups in the 80s, became the biggest show in basketball, saving the NBA from its declining popularity and setting the stage for the league's global expansion. Bird wasn't just Magic's greatest rival. He was one of the toughest, most skilled players to ever step on a court. His trash talk was legendary, his confidence unmatched, and his impact on the game undeniable. If you want to see why Bird was just as great as Magic, click here right now.